hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we have got Kevin Munhall on the pod. For our newer listeners, in these artist exploration episodes, we aim to explore the paths to success that artists have forged and are still forging, and tease out how their theatrical training has helped them to blaze that trail. And Kevin is actually someone who reached out to us about coming on. He was thinking that some of the work that he does with breath and performance coaching would be really appropriate to our students. And I have to say, I agree. And I really like the timing of trying to get it out now in January. As our regular listeners will know, normally in our January and February pods, I like to be a little health focused with these artist episodes. You know, we've done some general wellness episodes in the past, and this year we got this episode, which is going to focus on breath work. And then our next artist episode is going to be focused on vocal health with the great Dr. Paul Kwok. Obviously, I recognize not everybody listens to this podcast synchronously. So I often do get people, I've often made the joke of like, they'll be congratulating me on the birth of my child because they're listening to an episode from 4 years ago. But for those who are listening in January and February, in the middle of their prime audition season, especially those seniors, you may be about to head out to New York City Unifieds, and a lot of this will apply really directly to you. And I will say, no, that's definitely true for our student listeners, but I also really think for our parent listeners, you can really benefit from some of this advice he gives, both for yourself to actually take in some like this breath work and stuff, and then also how you can influence your kids. You know, I often say at this time of year, it is a great time for parents to make sure you are tending to your own use, right? Are you a ball of nerves? And if you are, you're undoubtedly getting in the way of your child and their psychological process. You know, that's where I often tell our parents when we're at the Palmer House, go book yourself a massage or get yourself a drink, whatever you need to do. But if you need to yourself relax because you're in that heightened state, that will only help your child navigate their process and apply some of the things in this episode to themselves. You know, and you've heard me say this time and time again at this time of year, but for most of our students that have been preparing for months, this is where in those 4 different buckets we talk about, we help you with the artistic buckets, the organizational bucket, the strategic bucket, and the psychological buckets, all kind of what we help you comprehensively with MTCA. That last bucket of the psychological, it just becomes so huge at this time of year. Such a big part of your focus wants to be about how you can bring a joyful, present, psychologically competitive human being into the room. You know, and for the most part, again, the artistic work, you've been working for months, the artistic work is where it's going to be, right? You've done your organization. Hopefully here you are, you've done your applications and all those kind of things. Hopefully you've listened to some of that strategic advice, you know, and how you've set up your auditions and what you're thinking about. Though certainly some strategic adjustments can continue to be made this time of year. But so much of the game now really turns into that psychological part of who you bring into the room. You know, I think about with myself, the difference between Charlie at his best, you know, the version of Charlie that is like charming and effervescent and funny and quick on my feet and really fun to be around, that person definitely exists. And also the stressed, glowering, kind of melancholic version of myself also really exists. Those are both Charlie. They're both true to me. And in some ways, they're both authentic to me. As you know, we all have so many sides to ourselves. There's so many different versions of ourselves we can bring in the room. But it's part of my job is going, well, how can I bring the best version of myself in the room? How do I bring the fullness of myself, but hopefully also, you know, the best version of that, the healthy, glowing version of myself and not the downtrodden, sick, whatever, the not best version of myself. It's just such a huge part of what this time of year is. All right, I won't say much more. I'll be seeing many of you in New York City, in Chicago, in LA over the next coming weeks. Again, please do come up and say hi if you're a listener and we haven't met yet. Of course, if you do want to be on the podcast itself, I will be doing those in-person green room interviews for person on the street interviews. So just let me know if you want to be on the pod. Depending on, you know, if I'm talking to a student at the time, I may redirect you, say, hey, come back in an hour, come back in half an hour, right? But I will do my best to get you on if I can. And I do mean to say also, if you have any specific subjects, I wanted to say this last year, but if you have any specific subjects that you know you want to chat on, please do let me know. You know, I'm going to try to make these person on the street interviews a bit more bite-sized so we can fit them in for the episode and I get some more people on and try to make the editing a little bit easier on us. But I think I'm going to try to help tailor them a bit, but so can you. If you know, hey, I really want to give this bit of advice, if there's something you know you want to talk about, maybe some big lesson that you want to pass on to the next generation, our listeners will definitely appreciate it. So don't hesitate to let me know what the thing you want to share is. All right. Without further ado, here is Kevin Munhall. Well, we are are so excited to be joined by Kevin Munhall. Kevin has a BFA in musical theater from the University of Michigan. He's been on Broadway in Tootsie, Anastasia, Allegiance, Anything Goes, and has now added to his many hyphens, becoming a breath, stress, and performance coach. So we'll talk a bit more about what that means specifically, as I do really think this time of year, especially as this episode we'll be releasing, performance anxiety is just so big for so many of our listeners. I also, Kevin, I saw some pictures of you online taking a few Broadway show league swings. So we may have to chat about art and athletics a bit. I know that also gets into the work that you do. So we may talk about it as well. Though I will say they did you a little dirty in one of those photos. It looks like you're about to miss the ball that you're swinging at. It wasn't a nice photographer, whatever they chose. Kevin, how are you doing? Welcome on the show.
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Of course, truly a pleasure. I didn't mean to start off with a Broadway dig. It just happened to be on my on my list here. Well, so let's start off a little bit with, I want to talk about your personal and professional journey, and then we'll get a little bit more into some of the stuff you're doing at Habit Disruption, which, again, I think will be really relevant for our listeners. But let's start you off with kind of the first question we ask so many people, which is, catch me up to where you were as you begin your college journey. So as you start to look at Michigan, let's hear about the first 16, 17 years of Kevin's life. Where do you come from? How did you make that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if I really thought about it, I've always loved singing and performing, but I think I was the last person to find out. What I mean by that is I grew up playing sports. I didn't sing. I didn't dance. I didn't go to acting class. But that being said, my mom always tells the story that when I was tiny, and I would go into like the bathroom by myself, she'd always just wait and be like, "Is everything okay? What's happening?" And she'd always ask people coming out of the bathroom, "Is there a little boy singing in there?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay, he's fine." So I guess I didn't realize it, but I've always enjoyed singing. But it wasn't part of my story at all. I played baseball and soccer pretty much year round.
Now you're really insulted by my Broadway show league dig. Now I understand.
You
may have been hitting most of the ball. It just could be a deceiving photo.
It was the All-Star game of the Broadway Softball League, so wow. I don't know.
You're swinging at everything is what you're telling me. Maybe it was a bad pitch. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, so I honestly, going to the theater just meant I had to tuck in my shirt and miss practice. So I didn't really like it at all. Yeah. Flash forward to honestly high school, I was playing soccer and someone slid into my knee and tore my MCL. And so I couldn't play. And I was blessed that just like the most amazing choir teacher of all time, Doug Riney, I was living in Wichita, Kansas at the time. He saw me and he was like, you could like come be in the back of a musical or something. And I was like, yeah. I don't know anything about that, but like, seems fine. Why not? I got nothing else going on. And I showed up and, as much as I've loved athletics my whole life, the culture around it was never a good fit for me. Uh-huh. And I showed up to like day one of the musical. We were doing Footloose at the time. And Footloose. I did not have the feet to cut loose, but everyone was just the most welcoming and so kind. And from moment one, they were like, "You're one of us." And I was like, this feels good. This feels really good. And so I kind of got bit by the theater bug there. But, I was 15, 16 at the time. It was very late. So I never thought that was going to be my career path or anything like that. I was, going to kind of like Unifieds, but for soccer players, like going to showcase tournaments and things like that. But I was also very...
You have to do monologues as well? Was it monologue songs?
Thankfully not. But because I was living in Wichita, Kansas at the time, there's Music Theater of Wichita. And I was in an IB International Baccalaureate program at the time. So academics were kind of my thing. I was going to, go be an engineer and play soccer or something. And as part of that program, we had to have a certain number. It was a lot of community service hours. And so one summer I worked backstage at the theater volunteering as like an intern for community service hours. And I feel like so much of my career path has just been having these beautiful guardian angel people look out for me and me just like being fortunate enough to like say yes when they showed up. And there was a guy who was in directing the show who did like this fun little workshop for the interns as like a thank you for literally working like 12-hour days behind the scenes. And it was Mark Madama, who worked at the University of Michigan at the time. And so I sang for him and we did like some improv things and it was fun. And then afterwards, Wayne Bryan, who ran Music Theater Wichita at the time, he was like, what are you doing after this? It was like the summer after my junior year or something like that. I was like, I don't know. And he's like, I know someone who works at a university. He's interested and he wants you to kind of come and audition. And I was like, that sounds great. Can you talk to my parents about this? Because they're not going to understand this or want me to do this at all, which I'm a parent now. I totally understand. I get it. But thankfully,
no one's more restrictive than a theater dad. I'm like, oh, she will not be singing. Let's be clear. Maybe a ballet class and then she's out. Oh, yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So thankfully, they had the conversation with my parents. They let me go to some auditions. They're pretty much like, if you audition, we'll just see what happens. Yeah. So yeah, I auditioned.
Does that mean you weren't doing at that point like a full list? You weren't doing 15 schools and a full thing, or were you? Did you do the unifieds for Chicago, or was it like, hey, I'm checking out Michigan, a couple schools, and then I might go back to engineering?
Yeah, so I auditioned at the University of Michigan. I sent in a tape to Ithaca. I went and auditioned at Oklahoma City University and University of Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I think that was about it at the time.
A small list. And how did your parents feel in terms of first the idea of that pivot, if they had their hearts set on engineering, and then so how did that conversation go? As I guess this brave person had this conversation for you because you were too wimpy to tell them yourself. How did it go with them?
Yeah, I don't want to give myself too much credit. It could have been anything. Could have been architecture, like literally anything but musical theater.
Right. But they thought, oh, he's going to do a productive, normal career. And now it's going to waste his life doing art.
Absolutely. I have to give them so much credit because they said yes. They didn't say like I couldn't audition. They knew. I think they probably thought my chances were pretty limited, and it was a long shot anyway. So I think they had enough. They really trusted Wayne Bryan at Music Theater Wichita because he's such a good person and because he takes so much time to know people and to care about people first before the performance side of things. And so they knew that these people actually had like my best interest at heart.
Yeah.
So
right, he has no financial interest in you going into this. He's just saying, I believe in your son. This person has talent, and that's great.
So I was lucky in that sense.
Yeah. And then did you do a secondary? Did you apply to normal schools too? Did you think, well, okay, I might get a BA somewhere else if this doesn't work out?
Yeah, I auditioned or applied to other schools as well. I think I visited a few at like theater management programs as well. I think at like University of Santa Fe, somewhere in Chicago, a few other. Those were kind of like my mom being like, hey, maybe business and theater, like something real. Yeah. I didn't really know what any of it meant though. And at that point in my life, I didn't know what I wanted to do, to be completely honest.
Well, I love also seeing like, sometimes we talk about the transferable skills, and we'll get into Michigan here in a second, but like the transferable skills of learning what it is to be a performer, but also that like the things that made you a good, maybe certainly in some ways soccer player, but a good enough student, an IB student who could have gone to these other schools, also are still continuing to make you a successful person to this day. That you're on this podcast not just as someone who's a performer, but someone who has built their own business and understands a certain level of science that we're going to get into. It's like that. Like I do think sometimes people are like, well, it's going to be theater, and that means all those other things will go away. You go, no, just because you're doing this thing doesn't mean you have to put down those other skills, even if they aren't represented hugely in your college experience. But let's talk about your college experience. How was it then in terms of, did you feel, was it the dream? Was it, did you feel like you took advantage of some of those academics that Michigan offers compared to other schools? What was the Michigan experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, the Michigan experience really was a dream. I feel like I died and gone to theater heaven when I first showed up. I will say everything about my story of like kind of lucking into all of this and, getting into all of it very late was like such a benefit for me to a certain extent, and then became my downfall, and then became the rebirth of what I do now. So I will also say that like my experience there was just feeling behind from moment one of being like, oh, everyone's been doing this forever. Everyone has so much training. Everyone knows what Sondheim is. I don't know who he is. Like truly.
You're showing up to Michigan. You've never heard of Sondheim. Like you're not like a musical theater nerd at that point.
I was a musical theater nerd to the extent of what was available in front of me, which was like the cast albums I had heard of or checked out from the library, or the shows that happened to be happening in my town at the time.
You liked it, but you're like, you're not like, I've done a deep dive on everything and I'm listening to everything. Yeah. Great.
No. So,
Well, but
go ahead.
how do you become, and again, I talked about the way that athletics maybe informed and will inform your business as we talk about some of that. But it also seems like you obviously have a natural athleticism that lends itself to dance, but you're not somebody who grew up dancing. You said you didn't have the foot looseness. Maybe that was just you didn't have a working knee at the time. But how do you become someone who's primarily going to then be seen as a dancer? I mean, you're going to work as I'm seeing swings and I'm seeing, a lot of dance heavy shows. You just said you just did Damn Yankees. I mean, you got to be able to move a little bit to do Damn Yankees. So how does that happen in college? Is that happening in summers between college? How are you getting to the level of someone who's going to be known as a dancer if at 16 you were standing in the back with a broken leg?
Yeah, I would say the only way that I made it to where I was actually is because of the academic background that I had. So I went into Michigan with a ton of credits through IB already. So I looked at what was like immediately available around me. I knew what shows were happening at Music Theater Wichita during the summer that I wanted to do. I was looking at the shows that were on Broadway at the time, and I liked dancing a lot. And even though I wasn't very good at it yet, and I was like, I'm going to just like, I have all these extra credits available, so I'm just going to stuff my curriculum with as much dance as humanly possible. Like, for example, my senior year, I retook Tap 1 while at the same time being in Tap 4, just because I was like, I want as much tap as humanly possible. I don't feel very good about this. And then, my Broadway debut wound up being Anything Goes. So like the strategy paid off at first, but it really was like me going like, this is the weakest link. They've since told me that when I auditioned, like my teachers at the time, my dance score was definitely the lowest. And so it really was just like me having the work ethic from a sports perspective to throw it into dance. And so it was just like sheer effort and the opportunity awesome. That there were so many different classes available.
Yeah. I mean, so often we talk with our students about, leaning into your weaknesses and shoring up your weaknesses, especially in the college process where you go, I've got a year or two. For those who didn't, who are starting earlier, they go, if I got this time, I want to see, how do I want to be as an auditioner? That's certainly the idea of shoring up your weaknesses. That doesn't always translate, though, to, hey, you will become a dancer. Like sometimes we often say, hey, get to the point where you go, I feel really comfortable in a dance call. And that's really great if you're much stronger as a singer. But so exciting that someone who, obviously you had a natural ability if you were able to do it, but that someone who came in already by 17, 18 and were not a strong dancer, and then you're going to end up being professional dancer, basically. That is going to be the thing that you're known for. It's really awesome. Talk to me a little bit. What was graduating? How did you hit the industry? Sort of give me a little bit of your journey to career success and Anything Goes and all these amazing Broadway shows and non-Broadway shows that you did. Talk to me a little bit. What was the entry into New York in the industry for you?
Yeah, it was pretty standard. I had Showcase, was very fortunate that it went well for me. I had a lot of options of representation, signed up with agents pretty soon thereafter. However, what I will say, so Anything Goes, I wound up getting, I think, like 6 weeks after I'd moved to the city, which is crazy. But that was actually one of the shows that my agents couldn't get me seen for. So I went to an open call for it. And luckily, Kathleen Marshall is one of the only people who actually runs her own open calls, or at least she did at that point in time. So she saw me. I came in. I did like 6 callbacks. I didn't get it. I flew out to do a show, Tuacahn in Utah. And then while I was out there, I got a call that Kathleen wanted me to do Bells Are Ringing with her at Encores at City Center. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. I did an audition for that. So then I flew back and did that. And then the day after it closed, I went back in for Anything Goes and got it. So it was funny. It was really like, it was like a tryout. And
it's like one giant callback for the show.
One giant callback. And also, I found out later that she had asked a lot of people who I had worked with that she knew at Music Theater Wichita prior that summer, like, can I hire this guy? Like, is it okay? So just also like throwing out that message that like how you show up and the work ethic you have at those regional summer stock gigs sometimes is really the thing that gets you the Broadway show later.
Ain't that the truth? I mean, it's all network building, and it's already started for the if you're 16, 17, you go, it's already begun. I mean, you're talking about these people you met when you were 15.
Yeah.
But right, that it's not like, oh, now when I become a professional, that's when I turn on my name and that's when it starts mattering. It's like, no, it's been counting since it's already been counting. It's always time to keep making those good impressions.
Yeah.
So then how do you go from show to show? So Anything Goes well. I mean, was it then lots of joyful jumping show to show? Was it there's some troughs in there? What was the journey of the? I think you said it's about a decade in terms of the that career before we now turned into this work. Talk to me about that. What were those jumps?
Yeah. So it's funny. It took me 6 months or 6 weeks to book my first Broadway show, and then it took me, I don't know, 4 years to book my second one. And
Yeah.
I always tell people, like, getting a Broadway show means nothing. It literally just means that one team of people said yes. It might be like
Right.
two people said yes.
Yeah.
And that doesn't impact anything else. That doesn't really change anyone else's opinion. And so then, the journey from there, I did that for, the whole run of it. So it was like a year and a half. I did a bunch of regional theater after that. I think I wound up going on tour before I went back on Broadway with the Dirty Dancing, the musical, or not the musical, the classic story on stage, because it was not a
Oh yeah.
musical.
Oh yes.
Did some TV, did Smash on TV,
Oh
got to do
cool.
some cool.
And are you then figuring out your New York life? So, I mean, really, in some ways, you would have figured that out while you're in the Broadway show. But then, are you figuring out like a day job? I guess some of this maybe lead us to where we're gonna
Yeah.
to the work that you're gonna start. But how are you figuring it out? Like, you have this Broadway gig for
Yeah.
at least a while, as you're still pretty early in New York, and you're figuring out where you're living, all that kind of stuff. And then, how do you sort of get used to the New York City of it all? Is that more after the show? Are you sort of living on a high? Like how did that? All right, now I'm figuring out how to sustain this life, I guess.
Yeah. There's two answers to that. Number one, I'll go back to Anything Goes. Before I booked that job, the longest I had ever done any show was 8 performances.
Mm-hmm.
And then cut to, I don't know, 300 some. Like, I
Yeah.
was unprepared for that, completely unprepared. Like,
How could you prepare for it? I mean,
yeah,
nobody has, if you've in high school, maybe sometimes people have done 15, 20, but nobody's done 300 until you've done it.
yeah. And because my greatest skill at that point in time was effort, like how much
Mm-hmm.
effort I would throw into everything that I did.
Uh-huh.
I wore myself out so quickly. I
Uh-huh.
didn't understand my nervous system. I didn't understand recovery. I didn't understand what nerves were or anxiety was. I was nervous all the time. And I've always, like, the first decade in the city, I was like always a nervous wreck without realizing it. Like, from the moment I would get an email from my agent saying I had an audition, up until the point it happened, up until a week later, till I found out whether, like, I never took a breath that entire period of
Uh-huh.
time. And so what I will say is that I was doing the thing I wanted to do. And I was also going, I don't know if I can sustain doing this. Like,
Yeah.
maybe I've made a bad decision.
Yeah.
And I wasn't getting another show. And, it felt a little bit like, oh no, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was very fortunate in so many ways, but like, I didn't have a traditional day job. I didn't ever
Yeah.
have to do that because I was kind of hopping from other gigs to other gigs for the most part. I did a few things here and there, like some catering here and there, some events, some like flash mob type things, like
Oh my, performer
dancing,
event things.
performing for
Mm-hmm.
a billionaire's daughter's bat mitzvah, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But not like a
Yeah.
traditional job in that sense.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of things, because I didn't know if I could sustain it. I felt I was always wound up by this thing. I still liked it, but I didn't understand why my voice would kind of freeze up, and
Uh-huh.
it took me a while to kind of figure it all out.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and then, so what inspired you to, I guess, first get this training, and then we'll talk a little bit about. We'll take a break here in a second to talk about the work itself. But what inspired you then? Was it really about your own personal health? Was this an interest in helping others? Like, what made you go, "Hey, I want to get some certification, and I want to sort of understand this world a little better"?
yeah, part of it was I had some time in between things, and anytime I had time in between things, like, my uh, I grew up as part of the Baha'i faith. It was like a small world religion most people have never heard of. But one of the key tenets of it was always just like a service mindset, like like we are here on this earth to take care of other people and to help people. And so I was always like, when I wasn't doing a show, I was always on like New York Cares and just like finding random things that I could go be a part of. Like I worked at a garden for a period of time. I went and helped build houses for Habitat for Humanity. I worked at like this Jewish center on the Upper West Side. Like we would take like the old people out for like dances. It was like all sorts of random things. And so there was always also a part of me that felt like this was part of my immaturity and part of me not realizing like who I really was and what I cared about. But there's always like a little voice in me being like, you're just being selfish doing the shows. They're all about you. You need to do something else with your life that is more directly taking care of people. Now, I've gone very full circle and I see just the beauty and the service of what we do in such a different way, thankfully. But at the time, I needed something else. And so part of me getting the training that I did was me going like, I would really like to help people in a more tangible, direct way. And then the other part of it actually came from an injury. So while I was on the Dirty Dancing tour, I separated my shoulder in a very mysterious way. That to this day, like I went to the doctor's office and they were like, it didn't happen the way that you said it happened. I was like, I can assure you that it did, but like normally it takes like a blunt force trauma of some kind, and I didn't have any of that. So because it was so mysterious and I was recovering from that, I had a lot of questions like, how could this have happened? I thought I knew my body so well. Which
is it because you had such a level of tension or something that as if you've been hit by something that you've been squeezing so tight or something?
I think, yeah, that had a lot to do with it. And so that led me, I found the Alexander technique. And that was like the first place outside of like working with my physical therapist, who are wonderful, that had some answers that showed me like, oh goodness, like you are holding on to a lot, my friend, and it's at all times throughout the day, and that there's an easier way. And so I went and trained in that for 3 years. And then a lot of what I kind of learned with that is like the way that we hold our body impacts the way that we breathe significantly. And so that got me really curious about breathing. And then I trained in that. And then there's also like the mental, emotional, metabolic, physiological nervous system side of breathing. So then I trained with a respiration and sleep scientist and did a mentorship with him and did all this training to kind of like really, I just kept one rabbit hole after the other to find more and more answers. And, the interesting thing is that, yes, we were talking about how well I was doing as a dancer and getting jobs as a dancer, but it was always my voice that wasn't showing up the way that I wanted it to. And, I did all the classes. I went and did all the voice lessons, and nothing gave me the answers of what I wanted, of why I was getting fatigued, why I couldn't sing the notes that I wanted. And it wasn't until I did all this work and kind of left the business and started diving into all of this that all of a sudden my voice has opened up, and now it's doing the things that I wish it could have done earlier in my career. And it was really just like my nervous system was a wreck, and it was, it was just preventing me from letting my training shine.
Now your nervous system's dropping things. It's unbelievable. No, I will. Okay, so in a second here, we're going to take a break so we can get a little bit deeper into what some of this work is. I just wanted to comment on that idea of selfishness. I mean, I think that is so interesting, because I think like as performers, I think there is something selfish about training like in some ways, because it is so self-centered of like working on yourself. But of course, the idea is the balance of that is like so that you can give it away. It's like so that you can be of service better. You need an element of sort of self-care. I mean, I do think there's just so much balance of that in so many things of life. Of like, are you the person who's always leaning forward and taking care of others, and do you actually need to take a little bit more care of yourself? Though, of course, there also is that sort of image of an actor who's like, who is always focused on themselves and their own health and their own voice and their own, that's sort of the diva sort of picture that you imagine where you go. But are you, what are you giving with it? It's such an interesting question, I think, for actors of like, how much are we focused on the self versus how much are we focused on others?
Yeah. It's a fine line. And there's never an easy balance. We're always one side or the other, and it's a dance back and forth, I believe. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And on the back end, we're going to dive a little bit more into the specific dance of this breath, stress, and performance coaching. So we're back in a flash. All right, we are back with Kevin Munhall, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. So can you just define specifically now what you do? If I were to work with habit disruption, you call it a breath, stress, and performance coach, but it seems like also a couple different kinds of services. Maybe let's focus especially on the performance. If I'm coming to you as a performer, like what would I be working on? What is that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's really two businesses. One's like the whole corporate world, but when I'm working with performers, it is literally helping people understand and overcome performance nerves, performance anxiety, helping people prevent burnout, helping people with recovery, helping people understand their instrument and maybe blockages that they have that are physical tension related or breathing related or nervous system related. So it's part education, teaching people that, like, in my mind, this work would ideally be primary in all training programs because the nervous system is the lens through which that we interpret the world. Every emotion you've ever felt, every note you've ever sang is an expression of the state of your nervous system in that moment. And so,
wait, can you define a little bit, just for those of us who are not science majors, what you mean when you say your nervous system? I mean, at some point we had fourth grade science and probably we talked about it, but I don't know, there's blood and there's breath and there's what do you mean when you say the nervous system, or maybe how breath affects the nervous system?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the autonomic nervous system, which there are two branches of. One is more the sympathetic nervous system, which people think of as fight flight. A bear's chasing you and your heart's pumping, your hands are shaking, all those things. And then the other branch
These
of
are the
it.
signals that your body is sending to your brain. Is that? I may be incorrect. This is my fourth grade understanding of the nervous system.
So yeah, so it is the connection between your body and your brain. So it is a dance. There is information coming up from your body, and honestly, especially on the parasympathetic side, which is the other side. So the sympathetics on one side, the parasympathetics on the other side, which is more rest, digest. It's dealing with everything that's going to help you feel grounded and calm, helping you with sleep, helping you recover. And honestly, that side, 80% of the information on that side is coming from your body to your brain to let you know how you're feeling. So it is the connection through which we experience the world. It is a part of the stress system as well. So when you have something that you're worried about, or like an audition coming up and your heartbeat starts elevating, or if you're able to bring it back down, this is all a dance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of your nervous system.
So interesting. I mean, yeah, I've so many questions and so many sort of different connections that are firing as you talk about that. Some of them which are probably too personal for me to say on this podcast. But so for performers, what would this mean? Like we were talking about in the pre-show about Brittany Coleman, who's our most recent guest as we record this, who I know you are friends with, is a client of yours. Told the story of her very first big Broadway audition where she was shaking like a leaf, where something she clearly really was dealing. She could feel her body was betraying her in this moment because the stakes were high. What would she do in the work that she's worked? How if I'm Brittany, do I not have that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process. So first and foremost, what I would say is that her body wasn't betraying her. Even if that potentially is the experience, but our bodies actually don't know how to betray us. They're not smart enough. They're not smart enough to go, hey, I don't want you to have this audition, so I'm going to make your hand shake. So what's really happening is it's just survival in that moment. It's more than anything, it's helping people reframe and understand at a physiological level what's happening, rather than the kind of societal narratives we all have around it, which is based in like nerves, which is based in like performance anxiety or stage fright, which is based on like, this is a problem that needs to be fixed in order for me to do what I need to do, rather than viewing it through that lens, which is what I did for a decade. It's actually helping people understand what's happening first and foremost. And then once you understand it, which is, just the first step in the process, then you can actually make the correct choices of kind of how to navigate it. Because like, first and foremost, I would say that nerves aren't a sign that anything is wrong. It's literally just a sign that you care. And your body is responding. The process of your heartbeat elevating, for example, or your breath getting faster is actually your body trying to give you more fuel. It is sending more oxygen and blood through your body faster so that you have fuel to do something and act and take care of whatever it is, the thing that you're worrying about. So it really is first and foremost that. And then once we have that understanding, then I can give you different mindset ideas of things to think about and different reframing techniques. Then we can talk about using some of that fuel, how to actually take care of it and use it. Then we can talk about shifting your state, which is kind of where your breath comes into. Then we can talk about like cultivating nervous system resilience. So like, how is your nervous system operating outside of an audition scenario? Because who you show up with, the state of your nervous system as a human being is going to determine how well any of these kind of audition tips work in the moment. And then, taking a step back from that, looking at more big picture things of like, what is my identity? What am I actually what do I really want when I'm going in for this? What am I subtly looking for? Or like all the bigger stories that kind of might be contributing or even causing a lot of these nerves or the shaking of your hands to begin with.
It's so cool. It's so cool to hear some of the audition tips and stuff that we talk about all the time in this podcast, some of that sort of understood from a scientific perspective, or, it's not that there's no science, I guess, already in some of what we're saying, but or some of what, we'll say on the podcast, but just understanding a little bit more, definitely better language to some of it. I'm curious how much in terms of your work and sort of the way you think about it, if you're in the hallway at an audition, for instance, are you thinking of it as more psychological work or physical work? Obviously realizing those two things are going to impact each other, right? But, when someone wakes up at 4 a.m. because they're nervous or they're anxious, they're feeling, it's like, is it more important that they do a breath exercise? Is it more important that they're doing a psychological reframe? Are those things going together? Like, how would you attack? I'm in this moment, not necessarily a moment of crisis, like I'm having a panic attack, but like I'm in that moment, I'm outside the room. Is it more about what I'm saying to myself and the mantra that I'm saying to myself? Is it about I'm doing a certain breath exercise? What kind of stuff would you recommend to people? Maybe you don't have to give them the whole, 6 hours of work or whatever you'd be doing, but where would you see more of that going? Is it more physical or more psychological?
Yeah, it's going to be different for everyone, truly. I would say what is happening with our breath is kind of a manifestation of everything we've done up until this point in time, our past lived experience meeting the demands of the present moment in front of you. So I wish there was a simple answer, and I wish I could say like, this is the correct way of viewing it. But the real answer is that sometimes a mental reframe is really helpful. For some people, it's like there's a physiological thing going on that needs to be happening. The easiest way that most people work with me now is I run this like 8-week program that's virtual and online where we go through different modules each week on all of this stuff. And part of the reason is because different people respond to different things, but also my real hope and intention is to kind of reframe the way that we view this out of the kind of land of tips and tricks and into like a more thorough understanding, because like, it's kind of like saying like, okay, Michael Jordan, what are you going to do right before you start doing the free throw? And he's like,
box breathing, is that going to work for you?
And like, maybe, yes, but I think the real answer is like, what has he done the last 10 years leading up to that moment so that he's prepared? And unfortunately, I loved my training so much, but like there was zero conversation of like how any of this, like, aside from just learning the skills or like me practicing something in a practice room, there was no information of how that translates to when I actually want to do that exact same thing under pressure when people are watching me. And there was no real information as to like, what's actually happening? Why can I sing this way here and then not sing this way here? And so more than thinking of it as like, oh, I just need to do this trick thing right before I do this thing, it's more like, how can I like prepare myself knowing that I think stress and nerves is like the ultimate obstacle for performers managing it. Like no one cares if you can sing, they only care if you can sing under pressure. And so it's like, I think it's kind of like the primary understanding and one of the most worthwhile things to understand, because if you're doing this at a high level, you will always be in that kind of activated state of people are watching, and there's some amount of pressure.
It's so well said. I feel like you just won the podcast award. Like, you've avoided the tip and trick, which if I was basically asking you for, because I'm like, I don't know, what couldn't I take from this to give him a tip? But like, I couldn't agree more in terms of that idea of the deeper understanding of yourself, and just how, to your point of how different it could be for different people. We so often, there are people who go, I want to do push-ups before I'm in the room, and there are people who are going to be meditating. And I go, if you told me to meditate right before I walked in a room, I go, no way. That would, for me in that moment, I'm not going to feel activated in the way that like I do well with pressure. Like, that's, for me, a meditation wouldn't do it, but for other people, it totally does. That's well said. I like that a lot. Can we talk a little bit about some of the science behind what you're doing, right? You mentioned a couple of times that like this sort of science-based or science-backed, and clearly you are using wonderful science language. I feel like, I mean, I'm curious in your specific work, but I'm also interested kind of in the general, I'm going to say wellness space, but I'm also going to say in like the artistic space. I really don't know what does that mean when say something is science-based. Like, I don't know for my own training at Carnegie Mellon, like how much is Alexander or Linklater or Fitzmaurice? Obviously, I feel like they worked for me, but like, I'm like, I don't know, like, what does it even mean to be science-backed or science-based? So tell me a little bit what you mean in terms of what has been studied, how it's been studied, and what is the science behind some of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I will say that I don't think something has to be research backed in order for it to be effective or useful for someone. And I will shout that to the rooftops. You know, that being said, now the field of like the nervous system and like the physiology of like breathing, and especially as it impacts stress and mood and anxiety and mental cognition and sleep and all these different areas, is being studied extensively now, and it's really exciting what's coming out of it. So when I say research backed, what I'm saying, especially when I go through my program, I probably cite like 80 to, maybe that's an exaggeration, I would say I at least cite 50 studies in the course of this 8-week program. And what I'm doing is I'm saying what the researchers found, what they were doing, and then directly trying to apply it to the art of performing and making the connections there. So sometimes it's something like a specific breathing technique that they found that this breathing technique, doing it this type of, like, for example, the cyclic sigh, like a double inhale with like a little sniff on top, like an inhale through the nose, extra sniff on top, and an exhale through the mouth, extending that long. There was one study out of Stanford showing that breathing technique seemed to improve mood and anxiety, just doing 5 minutes a day, faster than mindfulness meditation or a couple of the other breathing techniques like box breathing that they found. So sometimes it's actually looking at a specific type of breathing technique. Often it's taking some larger concepts, like the concept of perceived safety, for example, which has a lot to do with whether or not our heartbeat gets into that elevated state, whether or not our breath ends up getting bigger or faster, whether or not we feel the nerves coming on or not. And so taking these concepts that have been like studied extensively, taking the findings from that, and then putting it into like, what can I actually do with this? How do I practice perceived safety? Yes. How can I cultivate that? How can I get better at interpreting my speeding heartbeat as something that isn't to be feared, but actually something that can be fueling me? Because all of these things have to be actionable at the end of the day. So it's really me taking the research and then finding ways to actually explore it that are very performer centric, so that we can actually build resilience.
Yep. It's so interesting also to what extent does a performer need to know what depth of some of these things? Like, it's like, because like, obviously, like, you might need to understand a lot of it if you're going to help a lot of different performers. I only need to understand my own body, really. Like, though I guess maybe my changing body as I age and different things like that. But like, I understand, and you have to understand what works for me. I often felt that way with vocal technique things too, of like, it is not necessarily true that the people who know the most about the voice are the best singers. Though to some extent you have to know the most to be a great teacher if you're going to teach all different kinds of voices. But I kind of wonder of like what level, like, I imagine even after an 8-week course, most people are not spouting all of these things the way that you're able to do. It's amazing that you can, but like what level What level is useful for me? If I'm an 18-year-old performer about to go into my college auditions, like what level is it useful for me to understand my body in terms of, I guess, what scientific level or what, like, how deep do I have to understand some of these concepts?
Not very deep, to be honest. Like,
Good answer. Yeah.
you just need to know. I think it's helpful to have a good picture of like what's happening, potentially why it's happening, and then like a few different points of entry of things you can do in different categories to kind of explore it. So I think the first category that you can explore is story. So like the stories that we're putting on top of the sensation. I teach people a lot of different strategies in that category. Then there's action. So like
a story on top of the sensation, meaning like what I'm telling myself is happening to me right now. So a story would be in Brittany saying, my body's failing me right now, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. The kind of interpretation of what we're experiencing versus just like the sensation itself. And then there's things in like the action category, like what can I do physically? Like for someone, it might be that push up, it might be a plank, it might be something, trying to use some of the energy that your body's giving you rather than trying to ignore it and pretend that's not there. So for someone who's been told to do a meditation, but you're literally flooded with all this energy to do something, that can be very challenging in a lot of situations. And honestly, for most people, not the best first thing to do. And then, there are the state shifting categories, which breathing and breathing techniques are like one of the different things you can do there. But there's stuff you can do, visualizations, different things, like temperature, water, all sorts of different stuff in that category. And then coming back to the story, usually again, once you've done some of these things, has usually shifted because our story is determined by the state of our nervous system. Yeah. It's like the reason why most people get in an argument with their spouse or loved one or partner at 2 a.m. and not like over breakfast is there's a good reason for that. It's you're tired and everything is being viewed through the lens of like you don't have very many resources at that moment.
Also because she's wrong. She's just wrong at 2 a.m. a lot.
She's more wrong at night.
More wrong at 2 a.m. I think than in the morning. No, that's so helpful. And I think, I don't know that everybody has a lot of, not that you need to give tips and tricks, but has a lot of tips and tricks and tools, I should say, maybe in those moments of state shift. I mean, I certainly had the experience. I was joking with one of the people, we just did a private audition with Montclair, the person who runs Montclair is a friend of mine. And, we were saying like remembering the different bathrooms at these, at Ripley Greer that we've tried to wipe sweat off our bodies. And you're like, you can't tell yourself to stop sweating. If for some reason that is a thing, your body, if you tell yourself, it just makes you sweat more. Whatever that like experience of being like, oh God, now I'm getting nervous. Like, and then I'm like patting my forehead and like, well, it's just making it happen more and more. But I'm not sure I would have or still would have necessarily what is like the breath thing or what would I do in that moment to calm myself. Yeah, I don't know that many young people have an option where they would go, right, I would do what other than pat myself and stress about it.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is that unfortunately also like most people have only ever explored or tried breathing techniques in the most serious high stakes of situations. Like most people haven't practiced it first when there's no stakes, when they're like literally just sitting on the couch. It's like, okay, I'm literally about to go in for this final callback. Now's the time to pull out this box breath and hope it fixes everything. And it's literally going back to the basketball idea. It'd literally be like the first time you practice free throws is like the fourth quarter of the NBA finals. Like the reason they have done this, they're able to do it in the NBA finals because they've done it 8 bajillion times beforehand. And so a lot of the work I'm doing is like helping people put in the practice and build these new associations when the stakes aren't high, so that when you do need to use these techniques, it's not the first time your body's like, oh, I know what this is. I understand what you're trying to do. Oh, I have the capacity to do this.
Yeah, that's so well said. You may know this if you're an NBA fan at all, but I know that's true of like Steph Curry. Like in the middle of games, like lowers his heart rate down to like an obscene level. Like he'll be sitting on a bench and he'll be like, he can in a 2-minute break just do like whatever. He has a very strong ability to do that more than other people, which also then lets him play more and increases his longevity and all these other things.
Yeah,
so cool.
It is definitely a practice skill.
Yeah, for sure. I know you work with normal people too, non-performer people. So I wonder for our parent listeners, often we kind of end with parent advice. I'd love to talk about like first, what and how they can apply some of this for themselves, or what you would recommend for them as a tag along to this process, as for many of our parents who are coming to Unifieds and watching their kids stress through this. And then also, if there are people who go, I think my child could really benefit from this, but of course, my child won't be listening to this episode because it's longer than TikTok. So how could they? Basically, like, what advice would you have for the parents in terms of how they can help themselves and how they can help their kids?
Yeah. Two things I'll say. One is that the primary regulator of our nervous system is other people. So all of these tips and tricks are secondary to the fact that, like, when you're around people who are grounded and calm and like really sturdy, it's a lot easier for you to be as well. And so as best you can, if you cannot add fuel to the fire by being all amped up and adding to the pressure of the moment, and honestly, even your excitement, like even in the best intentioned version of it, it's so easy when we're in these heightened states for excitement even to turn into nerves or to turn into worry or anxiety, just because it's more energy than we are able to properly kind of handle in those moments. So my tips and tricks would be like,
I got one. I'm getting it out of you.
Yeah. My tips and tricks, especially for Unifies, and this is for the parents as well as for the prospective students, is like, go slow as much as you can on those days. Do not be in a rush. Like, we don't want to be doing things to make ourselves super excited before we have to go do the thing. The other thing I will say is that is not the day to rehearse a bajillion times. Like, you've already done all the work and you have to trust that you've done that work. And spending a lot of energy going over it a million times beforehand is just you're going to have less energetic resources for the time when you really need it. So the slower you can go, make sure you're fueling your body, not just caffeinating your body, but like, caffeine is something that is going to raise your state of arousal. And so it's easy for us when we are nervous or anxious to interpret anything that's raising our state of arousal as anxiety, as nerves. It's not going to help us to feel more grounded. So like, actually, like eating our protein and making sure, especially when we're nervous, it's easy to not want to eat. And I totally understand that feeling, but like, we are going to need the fuel because stress is very energy intensive more than anything. So fueling, going slow. Also, anything we can do to kind of like bring some levity to the situation is going to be helpful. Like, even in our best efforts to like self-regulate and do the breathing techniques, it turns into something so serious and so hyper-focused, which honestly just puts us into a more sympathetic state anyways, if we're just like, I have to do this right. So like, letting it be fun. Like, I know that's a bold thing to say, but letting, as you as the parent, not having to do the thing, like, what can you do to kind of like help put them in like a playful, curious, happy state, rather than one that is like super focused.
Yeah. I mean, if we got such good advice in so many ways. You did do tips and tricks. You won the pod by not giving tips and tricks, and then you gave some good tips and tricks. No, but so, we so often say it's like the performer's job to like walk in the room and have fun. And like, how can you do that if you've been like serious and stressed in the hallway? So that, okay, go have the most fun right now. Like, it's not like, if you can make the process fun. I mean, we see that, we're there in like the green rooms and we're hanging out, and like the kids who are like having fun with the whole process then tend to do really well in the audition rooms, because it's not like, oh, now it's my fun time. Like, there's a level of focus, so you can't. If you're so goofing off that you're like, that you are showing up late to your audition, that's a different issue. But like, to make that process fun, I love that, and I really love the idea. You have a young child?
I have two. Yeah, 5
and 2.
Two
Kids.
5 and 2.
5 and 2. I mean, it really does. I so often when I had a baby, and they would talk about skin to skin and like how much you are the thing that is grounding them. You're giving them literally like a nervous system. They're borrowing your nervous system because they can't regulate their own.
Yeah.
I think about that in this process for our parents so often, where it's like, there are moments when it'll be back to the toddler and you will have to, just for a second, lend them your nervous systems, which means the more you can do to keep yours in check or in good shape, the better.
Absolutely.
Kevin, this has been so fun. I've so loved chatting. Anything else that you didn't get in that you wanted to mention? Anything that you go, yeah, I know you had 6 more tips and tricks you wanted to give us, or anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, no, I could talk about this literally forever because I'm such a firm believer because of it. It's changed my whole world. And I'm so grateful for all the people who helped me find it. And honestly, now, I went away and did this for 5 years, and now I came back to performing after 5 years away. And it's like night and day experience of just like, not only has it opened up my voice, not only has it like made me like better at auditioning or whatever, but more than anything, it's like brought the joy back to what I do and made it possible for me to go like, oh yeah, that's why I wanted to do this to begin with. And I think the last thing I will say is that there's so much talk about authenticity or like finding who you are, or
Buzz used to buzzwords.
Yeah. And in my experience, I think being authentic is just meaning not trying to sing, act, dance in a way that you think someone wants it to be done. It's like, as much as you can, being okay to do the thing the way that you want to do the thing. And that takes so much confidence to be able to do that. And that takes so much like not introspection, but I think it's really rooted in a nervous system that is not trying to please or not trying to get my approval and safety through the lens of someone else liking me. And so a lot of this work has surprisingly helped me find what I actually like and like who I want to be as a performer, and helped me know what's a yes versus I'm going in for this because I should, or any of those things. So that's the last thing I just want to say, is that like, it really is I went into it to find the solutions to try and help me do this thing better. And it's amazing how it also honestly just like helped me understand myself better as a person, which, always makes you a better performer when you know yourself better.
Yep, I love it. Kevin, this was such a great interview. I'm so glad to get to chat with you and learn a little bit more. If people want to hear more, where should they follow you? On Instagram is the best, right to the website? Where do you like people to find more information?
Yeah, Instagram, I'm Kevin_Munhall. My website is habitdisruption.com. And I have another one of these 8-week programs virtually that's starting in February.
Well, it's perfect time. I think this is released in January, so that's great.
Cool.
Kevin, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So fun getting to chat with Kevin. He was a stranger to me before this interview, and I have to say I was like really impressed with both his knowledge, his scientific acumen was really impressive, and just his ease in kind of demonstrating some of these concepts he was talking about. I think it's not always easy to develop rapport with a stranger, especially, you're meeting for the first time and you're sort of figuring this out on Zoom, but I thought he was really easy to talk and laugh with, and generally very impressive person. Okay, a few quick hitters here. I'm going to skip over the transferable skills and the entrepreneurship. I wrote that down, but I do think Kevin is another great example of that here. I think you can see it. He sort of his intelligence and the academic aspects of things that really continue to fuel his career. I think those are really impressive, both as an artist and a business person. But we've been talking about that a lot, so I don't need to dive deep into that. Just another example of this transferable skills. And this one I wrote down. I'm not sure this is a full takeaway, but I'm interested in the difference of like nerdery back when Kevin and I were growing up versus like nerdery now. Just like that idea of him being super into musical theater, but then not knowing who Sondheim was as he entered college. I think that's really interesting. And again, I'm kind of assuming that Kevin is about my age from some context clues. But this was definitely true for me growing up. I guess that's what I'm thinking about. The internet was like just starting to exist. It did exist, but there was still this idea that like your knowledge was based on what you had access to, right? I mean, I remember literally renting out every CD of every musical and reading every play that was in my local library. And it wasn't that many. And then I remember being so blown away when I got to CMU pre-college and like the library they had access to. I was so hungry to like read every single play I could get my hands on. And you could take out, I think at the time, you could take out 50 plays at once. So I would take out 50 plays, literally 50 plays at a time, and like read them all and give them back and then take out another 50 plays. And I was like, I'm going to get through all these plays. I didn't actually get through every single play in the library, but it seemed almost achievable and amazing to have this vast resource, but also it wasn't so vast. It was just like what could be in this couple rows of the library, right? But I do think with our students today, I think because they grow up and like literally everything is at your fingertips, you just have like so much information and so much expertise thrown at you that the issue isn't about access. I mean, if you're just like YouTube itself, YouTube has everything that like human knowledge somehow exists on YouTube in some form. It somehow, it like does something to the way young people lean in. It's just so much less likely, at least I found it so much less likely for them to be voracious in the way they attack information than it was in my day. And that's really not like a criticism of young people today. I mean, I do really kind of believe we are creatures of the environment we grew up in. But I do think it's interesting. It's just like the way that they seek information now is very different than the way that we did when I was growing up. It's almost like it somehow feels like a burden to them in the way that like the internet, I guess the information itself is a burden to them in a way that like, to me, it was magical. Like that you could just, that you could have access to that information. It was so new and it was amazing. And the idea of like Wikipedia was like, what? We're just going to have all human knowledge at our fingertips. But I think there's something about like information overload that just makes students almost shut down today. Honestly, the closest analogy I could think to myself was like with television. Like when there weren't as many shows on, I think I used to watch way more TV. It just like felt so amazing when we first had access to like streaming and we could download shows. I mean, first it was DVDs, but then we could like watch past shows. It was just like, oh my God, I'm going to watch everything and get my hands on. And, maybe this is more about me being old and having a kid, but my first reaction when I hear about a new show is like, oh, no, not another new show. There's too much out there. And so I don't want to watch any of it now, right? And I find myself watching very little television these days. And sadly, it's something I do hear from students. I know we've talked about with the podcast and me trying to release these highlights for you to make it easier on yourself. But I do hear from students many times that they can't handle the idea of an hour-long conversation. That for them, the idea of an hour-long podcast is like super daunting. Luckily, that has not yet happened to me with podcasts and audiobooks. I do really still enjoy them, but I do think it's a way all of our brains have really been changed by the sort of flash of social media and the way it grabs your attention. It's warped our brains and our ability to sort of consume information in the way that we have. That's not novel or some genius idea. It's just something I think that we're all noticing in the way that we consume information in sort of this instant gratification age. Okay, that was more of a takeaway than I thought it was going to be. I thought maybe that was going to be a quick hitter. You never know. Sometimes we start and it goes in a different direction. I'll try to make this one maybe a little shorter, but I just had that little note. Kevin was talking about that conversation he had with Wayne, or the mentor who kind of helped his parents to see that maybe he could potentially pursue this industry. I gave out a shout out to one of my former teachers in our last episode, Joe Demensick, who's now running the program at Seton Hill. I was talking about those like expert instructors and what they can do to help us at a young age, especially if they could bring expertise to you at a young age. But I do just want to give a shout out to those bold instructors like Wayne who do encourage young artists to take this crazy leap. And I always say to parents, it is really helpful when you get that feedback from someone who doesn't have a vested interest financially in your child, right? If I, Charlie Murphy, tell you, hey, your kid should really pursue acting because you should pay MTCA to help you do it, it's going to carry a bit less weight since, of course, I would then have a financial interest saying, hey, come coach with me and give me money, right? But most people, most young artists can point to a person or sometimes a series of people who at some point encouraged them and maybe actively encouraged their parents and gave them the heart to have that conversation so that they could make the leap that it is still a crazy and a difficult leap to say, I'm going to pursue this at a professional level. So there always are those people in all of our past. And I think the one I want to give a shout out to, hilariously, I think, at least to me, one of the people who really started those conversations for me was this guy, Buddy, who used to run CLO Mini Stars, who at the time sat both of my divorced parents down and said, your son is really talented. He's going to pursue this at the college level. And I want to talk to you about BFA programs and how that would work, right? And both of my parents, despite like never agreeing on anything for 15 years of my life up to this point, both of them, after not having a civil word, basically there was not a civil word that they could have spoken to each other. They were like falling over each other to agree with what an idiot Buddy was and how wrong he was, and he doesn't know my kid, and my kid's going to do something academic. What are you talking about, right? And like truly, it's like one of the happiest I've ever seen the two of them in like falling over each other and agreeing about how wrong Buddy was. But of course, in my case, Buddy was that first soldier through the breach. He was the first soldier who kind of took the bullet for his fellow man. And, it took a series of conversations with different people, and then I would follow up with it. And, eventually it did work, and my parents came around and everything worked out great. But I'll never forget Buddy in that first conversation. And, and for many of our students, I've seen them at different points. Often they're a little bit farther along in that by the time they meet us, they know that they're going to be having the conversation. But I sometimes still see those parents where I go, oh, you've been newly convinced, or you're not even yet fully convinced. And where they are looking for a little bit of that expertise, or looking for a little bit of, can my kid really do this or not? I also just wanted to note this is another one of those great examples of catching up a little late with dance. When we talk about artistically, we've had a few of these on the pod, but I do think it's cool to see, as we pointed out in the interview with Kevin, that is possible, that dance, which started out as a weakness, could really exit school as a strength. With MTCA, when we meet a student, we're often going to hear this idea of, I'm not a dancer. It's probably the number one discipline where people will say that is not their strength. And I'll say, honestly, depending on when we meet a student, we're often going to match that with our students in our goals for them. We're going to say, hey, this is not necessarily about turning you into an advanced dancer in a few months, or even many months if we have, right? But maybe our goals are really about, can we give you confidence as a mover? Can we give you confidence as an actor, as a performer in those dance calls? Even if you're not going to be kicking your face by the time you're walking into those auditions. But I do think, sort of on the converse, it's worth noting, we have seen a number of examples on the pod, and we've seen it with our students, a number of examples that it really can happen over those 4 years of school. Again, I think it's worth noting, maybe not necessarily every style can that be true for, right? Maybe you're not going to become a ballerina at 22 if you've never taken a ballet class by the time you're 18. Maybe not the question. I'm not going to say definitely not. I mean, who am I to say, right? But we have seen this story of a student where dance starts off as a weakness, 16, 17, 18. Dance is truly the weakest of their three, and ends at 22 as a strength. And then people can really make a career as a dancer or as a swing, as we see with Kevin, right? Okay, and let's close with the main thesis of this episode, which is just that idea of developing your own relationship with your own nerves and understanding your own body. And really, this idea of understanding sort of some of the science behind what's happening, understanding some of these concepts scientifically, and then experimentally, but then also experientially, and how it actually applies to your own body, your own practice, to what you actually need. I mentioned at the top of this episode that these two episodes we're going to do back to back, or our two artist episodes back to back with Kevin, and then upcoming our next one with Dr. Paul Kwok. We talk about vocal health. These episodes were recorded almost 2 months apart. I recorded with Paul today and with Kevin in really early December. But it is eerily similar, some of the advice they give you in this specific example of your need to understand your body and how these things are actually going to work on you physiologically, and not just the general science behind it. Though, again, it's helpful to maybe have some understanding of some science, but that what's more important is how it actualizes for you and your unique self and your unique voice and your unique nervous system. And I also really love the other sort of real parallel both of them mention, this idea of finding a baseline, right? The same way, it's not the first time, is not to start thinking about vocal health. It shouldn't be the first time you start thinking about vocal health. When you have a vocal injury, you want to think about it before. It is worth having this conversation and some of this experimentation about nerves and breathing before you're in a state of panic, right? Figuring out what works for yourself in practice and sort of as a baseline. And then ideally in these mid-stakes situations, before you jump into the highest of high stakes. That shouldn't be the first time that you're thinking about, what is my relationship with my nerves? Certainly something we talk about every mock audition in the debrief. It's a big part of it. I talk about how do you prepare yourself to do your work, and having a plan for yourself and a psychological plan to prepare yourself. Okay, I'll actually wrap with, I really loved this quote from Kevin. He said, no one cares that you can sing. They only care if you can sing under pressure. No one cares if you can sing. They only care if you can sing under pressure. I don't know if Kevin's quoting someone there. It really sounds like he's quoting someone. Maybe he's just quoting himself, but I think it's a great quote, right? No one cares if you can sing. They only care if you can sing under pressure. I'm going to jump back to my roots of my early days in the pod and really talk about these sports analogies. One of the big sports analogies I often make, with sort of sports psychology, I think there's a lot that can be learned between, sort of sports psychology and actor psychology. They've consistently studied this idea of like with basketball players and free throws, there's this idea that like we can see how pressure observably changes a person's skill set. So nerves or pressure or highly adrenalized situations can really change the way somebody performs. There will notably be a certain subset of players, and I don't necessarily understand why this is true or why they're the subset, that when the whole crowd is staring at them, when you have an arena staring at people and you're lined up with all the players looking at you and you're forced to make what is a relatively easy shot. For people who don't know what a free throw is, it's like not that far of a shot and you get to take as many breaths and as many dribbles as you need. And you're making what is essentially a shot that like a middle school player can make relatively easy. That there's a certain subset of people, they will struggle at this shot. And I think it's often really galling to the average fan. This is where the sort of average fan will be yelling at their TV that like these people who make millions of dollars, you theoretically can practice the shot as many times as you want. And some of these people cannot make more than half of their free throws when literally like the average guy in a pickup game can make 75%, 80% of the free throws. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult. You don't have to be a professional athlete to be able to make these shots, right? And what's interesting is that with a lot of these players, the data will show that they actually can make 80% of them in practice, right? But for whatever reason in the game, that number gets cut in half. I'll just pick an example. Dwight Howard is like a famous example where they would study and they would track this, that he often makes 40 to 50% of his free throws in the game. For his whole career, he makes like 40, 50%. I don't know if it's 45%, somewhere in that range, under 50% for his career. But in practice, consistently hits over 80%. And just, for the numbers of it, if the difference between like 45% and 80% doesn't seem huge, it is enormous, right? That is the difference between like the worst thing that a defense could possibly let happen. You do not want to give up, 1.6% or 1.6 points per possession. If you're getting 80%, you get 2 free throws, that's 1.6 points per possession. That's really bad. You would never want that as a defense. And then the difference, if you're making 45, 50%, that's something that the defense might actively seek. They actually would intentionally foul players like Dwight or like Shaquille O'Neal, right? They would intentionally foul them because you can live with 0.8 points per possession. You can live with 1 point per possession. Often your defense is actually, that's a good result for you, right? But in that vast difference, in that big difference between 50 and 80%, I think it's really difficult for people to understand and explain why in that game time performance, given how good these people can be in practice and that they are professionals and that they can do other things at high stakes adrenalized levels, but for whatever reason, they cannot make their free throws, right? But the point is, and I guess what Kevin's saying, at the end of the day, nobody cares if you can make your free throws in practice. They only care if you can make them in a game in those high pressured moments. And that's true for most of us too. If you can sing in the shower, that's great, but you got to be able to sing in the audition room and on stage, right? I have this vivid memory. I think I told this story on the podcast before, but I have this vivid memory from school of one of my teachers, a previous podcast guest, Don Wadsworth. I wonder if I told this story on his episode, where I was trying to explain to him why I was like so frustrated with my work in class. And he was like, "You're doing great in class. I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's fine." He was he didn't understand what my issue was. And I was like, "You don't understand. In my dorm room, this speech is so good. And for whatever reason, I just can't bring that same level of good, that same abandon and creativity and the depth of feeling or whatever what I was experiencing. I couldn't bring what I was doing in my dorm room into class. And it wasn't that I felt like my working class wasn't good. It's just that I wasn't reaching the highest level of what I know I can do." And I remember him looking at me with this like knowing smile, and he would laugh and he was like, "That's the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole thing is everyone is brilliant in their dorm room. To bring in that level of artistry when the pressure is on, that's the hard part." I remember him sort of like being really tickled by this experience. And then I was thinking at the time, he doesn't get it. Like he just doesn't quite get it. Like, oh, he thinks he knows what I'm talking about, but he doesn't get it, right? The way, of course, young people often feel like old people don't really understand what they're experiencing. But now I look back at it and I'm like, oh, he absolutely got it. He understood what I was saying. And it's just really hard. That is what the thing is can you bring in that brilliant self in private, that brilliant self of the best work you can do? Can you actually bring that into an audition room? It's really hard. And most people are never going to get 100% of their best work into an audition room. It takes time and it takes experience to be able to bring as much of that as you humanly can. So hopefully, really my wish for all of you as you head into Unifieds and your audition season is that you can look at each of these auditions as a bit of that experience and can look at each audition and each experience as a bit of growth for you, and hopefully continue to practice and get better at bringing your full confident self into those rooms. And then of course, we always talk about give yourself a bit of grace and forgiveness when it ultimately doesn't go perfectly, because not each audition is going to go perfectly, and just take that learning experience as a positive result into the next room and see how you can make those small adjustments and maybe have a different result and keep getting better and better and better. Okay, let's wrap there on another episode of Mapping the College Audition, produced by Meghan, Cordier, and Kelly Prendergast, with social media work by Jordan Rice. Please follow us on social media, especially Instagram, where we are at Mapping the College Audition. And please like, subscribe, wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. If you're inspired to write us a rating and review and share this very podcast with your fellows, I won't try to talk you out of it. In fact, I think it's a great idea. And of course, check us out at mtca.com for help with your individual college prep process. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, please trust that you are enough for the right school exactly as you are right now. Now keep striving. We'll catch you next week.